A German spy thriller with a female assassin as the lead? Yes, please sign me up. Kleo is arriving on Netflix, and it may not be what you think it is. Manipulated and betrayed by a system she once trusted, a ruthless killer seeks revenge as the wall comes down, mixing the ideals of both East and West Germany. So this is like a graphic novel adapted into a series. The title sequences give the impression that this is a little fantastical, and that the synopsis then makes this sound so much more like an action thriller than it really is. I had to drastically adjust my thinking on what this was almost from the very beginning. This is way more of a drama than a thriller. We follow Stasi's assassin, Kleo, as she takes out a target and then is betrayed. Now, after a few years and the wall coming down, she finds herself freed and searching for why she was deceived and then who was responsible. Now, while this isn't an action-oriented series, there are action set pieces and they can be fun and even a bit ridiculous. There's also some subtle and dark comedy that weaves throughout the storytelling. My impression of this before getting into it was that it was going to be like a comic book come to life on the screen, with some over-the-top action and then violence as we follow this trained killer work out a revenge plot. What we really get is a buddy cop mystery that includes some action and humor. Jella Haase plays Kleo, and I like the quirky demeanor that she brings to the character. While she's a trained killer and extremely deadly, there's an innocence to her, or at least we get to see the beginnings of a conscience and maybe morals. And sometimes she's not as good as a marksman as we've been shown that she can be, so there are inconsistencies to the action that I think are mildly troubling. And when I had said that there's an innocence to her, some of the time she has this aura of a young child, like there are pieces of her psyche that are trying to poke out from behind the monster that was created by her upbringing and her training. Now, I really enjoyed this as it gives Kleo humanity by creating conflict within her. She's beginning to have this battle between her nature and her nurture. Now, there's a West German police detective named Sven, played by Dimitrij, Schaad, and the dude is endearing simply because he's earnest and he's bumbling. We can see this drive in him to succeed in his investigation throughout the entire show. He's a dog with a bone, but the obstacles he's up against are almost insurmountable. And he provides some of the humor within the series, as he looks on in horror at what Kleo can do. Now, I love the conflict that arises with him, also as he has to begin to make decisions that could be counter to what's best for him, but his drive has a stronger pull on his actions. Now, in this, Kleo also finds a roommate of sorts and a character named Tilo. Now, he's odd to say the least, but also there to provide a lot of the comedic relief, even though it's subdued. The character is kind of spacey, but he's well-meaning and he's endearing. While I thought a lot of his presence is fun, it's not overly necessary for the majority of the storytelling. And there's a scene with Tilo in the final episode that I really wish they wouldn't have included, because it takes this story and pushes it from realistic, with maybe some improbabilities, to something that is ridiculous and absurd. This is an 8-episode series with each of them almost an hour long. Now, each of those episodes focuses on one element of the story, sort of like a chapter, and this makes the series feel much longer than it really needs to be. Instead of feeling like a large story broken up into pieces, this feels like mini stories combined together to make up one large story. And now they all do tie in together, so it's not completely disjointed, but it ends up feeling like it could be trimmed and then condensed through many episodes. That being said, though, there are times, especially in the latter half of the series, that elements of the story feel forced into the narrative to create more intrigue. While some of this stays in line with the entire espionage angle that's present throughout, it also feels somewhat out of place in an effort to take the show in a new direction, or maybe at least draw out the mystery with even more. The pacing is also mixed in this. Sometimes there are exciting action segments that feel very energetic, while other times there are investigative scenes that are slower and more dramatic. In the first half of the series, Kleo's scoping out targets on her revenge list, and it's fun to watch the different ways that she goes about accomplishing her goals. Sometimes the actions were predictable, but it was still enjoyable to watch them play out, especially if there were any hiccups that came up in the plan. But after these wrap up, the storytelling focuses on the mystery aspect of the plot. And while I found these action pieces to be fun to watch, the intrigue of the story was what really was holding my interest. I became sucked into Kleo's quest, invested as she searched the clues and then tried to put them all together. Now, I think there are a lot of conveniences that come into play when elements are connected, but this does help us get from one point to another without being too bogged down. Now, something that was an absolute standout for me in this series was the cinematography. All the way through, this was consistently beautiful to look at. There are awesome aerials and then some wonderful, intimate ways that we're drawn into Kleo and her situations through the way that the camera frames the subjects. This presentation has a very European feel to it, which, I mean, come on, it makes sense that it is a European production. But I use this term to illustrate how the camera isn't afraid to minimize the character in favor of showcasing the surroundings. Now, this isn't a constant technique, but it does look great and it's used efficiently in varying the visual interest. Now, there's an episode that's mainly flashback and used for character development, and it's played out visually to resemble a stage play. This was awesomely executed as the production utilizes this monstrously sized area, allowing us to move through the years and scenes of Kleo's life in one contained area with many different set pieces. This also has a great aesthetic to the presentation, capturing a look and feel that really works, even though it appears more like the late 70s when this show is actually taking place in the late 80s to the very early 90s. The costume design, though, definitely captures the late 80s, especially whenever we see people from West Germany who appear to be more captivated by the trends of the US. Sven is consistently in a suit with the sleeves rolled up a la Sonny Crockett, and then he drives a Ford Mustang, giving us the impression that he is enamored with the thought of the US capitalistic ideal. Now, this isn't a perfect series, but I think you can find a lot of enjoyment in it if you go in not expecting an action-heavy show. Overall, Kleo is a slow burn revenge mystery. While this has some issues with the pacing, especially when it comes to drawing out scenarios and storylines longer than they need to be, the narrative does become engaging and intriguing as the series progresses by focusing on the charismatic leads. When their chemistry takes hold, they thrive as opposing forces, bringing heart and humor to the storyline. The slowness of the storytelling could be a hindrance to binging, but if given the opportunity, it can captivate and entertain. There's sex, nudity, a lot of profanity, and a ton of violence. I give Kleo 3.5 out of 5 couches. So are there any international thrillers or mysteries that you enjoy? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.